Let me do IntelliJ, just for fun. We did Eclipse last class, right? We'll talk about the if statement. It works fairly similar to English, right? You do if condition. What is a condition? What is a condition in English?
Condition.
What's a condition? How would you define it?
Condition is a situation. Like if not this, then that. Or if you want to get this, you need to have this. First you do this, then I will do this. Like.
Was everybody trying to define it better?
I know.
I tried. Point for bravery, man.
I know.
Like the state of something.
It's the state of something, okay. It's basically anything that can yield which values? Either true or false, right? The condition is either true or false, right? So condition is any kind of Boolean expression, right? We talked about Boolean expressions in week 1. You used 1,700 of those for assignment 1, right? And so now they appear here again. Anything that's going to return true or false, right? So we have the relational operator, greater than, and those things, and Boolean operators, and, or, not, all those guys, right? The parentheses are actually part of the syntax. You need to put parentheses there. The braces are almost part of the syntax. If you don't put a brace, then only the next statement belongs to the if. Right? It is important. I strongly recommend you put braces. But, and then we have an optional else clause. You don't have to put an else clause. Maybe you don't put an else clause, right? You don't put an else clause, what happens if the condition is not true? Absolutely nothing. You skip that step and go with whatever goes next.
So suppose in that case, if you don't put the else statement, what will it return? It will return B?
No, actually, let's do this. Yeah. Let's look at the example. Let's create a new project. Today is the 30th. We created a project and it has this stuff. But let me actually cut and paste this thing. What does this function do? It takes a Boolean and returns either yes or no, right? So if B, so that means if this thing is true, right? Return yes, otherwise return no.
Yes, no. Yeah.
Now, what happens if I do this? Well, actually, let me run it, right, and do something with it first. What would this print? No, right? 3 greater than 5 evaluates to false, and then when we pass it to Boolean to yes, no, that would return no, the word no, right? As a string. And that's what we would print, right? So if we were to run this thingy, hopefully, yeah, we get No.
Now, what if you don't put that down?
Left is good, right? Now, what if I don't put this thing? What does it return?
Yes.
No,
No.
nothing.
Nothing.
And so what's going to happen? What's the compiler going to tell me?
Error.
Yes, what the heck are you trying to do? This doesn't work. You need to return something, right? Missing return statement. Now, instead of using an else, I could have just done what would happen now?
You will also do nothing.
What happens if B is true? If B is true, returns yes. If not, it skips all that and then it returns what? No. So this would be the exact same effect as with the else. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Maybe? I'm seeing the gears turning behind your eyes. So I'm waiting for them to finish turning. Make sense? What if we do this? What would we need to change?
Yes.
Instead of that, what would we do?
No.
And then here,
Yes.
this would work. So we could write the same thing, right? First of all, this is how if statements work. Second, you can write the exact same, have code with the same effect written in several different ways. Does that make sense? Which one is prettier? Which one is better? This one or the other one? The one with the not B? Which one is easier to understand?
The other one is easier to understand.
This one is better than the one without with the
This
not,
one is short,
right?
But that one is
And
more in layman.
I would say this one is easier to understand. But that's me. Which one's easier for you to understand? Okay, good. Then we all agree. Then write it like this. If you disagree, then write it the other way. As long as it works, the main thing is for it to work. If it works, we can condone a lot of things.
If we try to use that one for a complex calculation, then we make mistakes.
Yes,
This one is like somewhat we can make it somehow.
yes. So just recap, we put an if, the parentheses are required, are part of the syntax. The braces are not strictly required, but you normally want them. The else clause is not required. And then indentation. I've been bugging people about it in your assignments, right? Think about this, right? Now let me do this. What's easier to read? This one or the one where we had the way we had it before? Indented, right? You want to indent your code, right? Why? Because it's easier for you to read, right? Right? Important thing is to indent consistently. How do you indent? Well, it doesn't terribly matter as long as you do it the same way all over, right? In reality, there are basically two. The only thing, basically, whenever you see an open brace, you're going to start at the next level of indentation. The only thing where there is actual discussion is whether this should be in its own line or here. Some people like it like this, some people like it like this, some people would do this kind of stuff like this.
Or else on the other line.
Even like this.
Yeah. This is like somewhat more beautiful.
For the most part, most people write it like this, with the only thing where people fight is whether this one should be there or should be on the previous line. The default Java convention is to put it on the previous line. I tend to do it both ways. Any questions on this? Do you see why indentation is important? It also helps when you are doing this stuff. Right? Then it's even more important. Don't do that, but. Cool. You can actually have your IDE automatically indent your code. Let's see. Reformat code. So I can mess up my stuff. And then do code. Reformat code, where was it here? And it will do the right thing. Isn't this beautiful? It's not quite the right thing. The only thing where this all breaks is when your lines become too long and now nothing works. But for the most part. You can also actually distinguish between tabs and spaces, but nobody cares. Just be consistent, or close to consistent.
How often do we need to use the curly braces?
What do you mean?
Every each line we need to put?
Not each line. No. The thing is that, okay, here's the deal. You need them whenever you're going to have here more than one statement. To group those statements into one thing. You don't strictly need it like this because there's only one statement, but many times you want it just because often you end up adding more statements. And then if you didn't have the brace, all hell breaks loose. So it's a good idea to put them. I actually don't always put them. When I know, for a function like this, I'll probably not write braces. Because I know that this is not going to change. Maybe. And then it changes. But it's a reasonable idea to always put them, especially when you're starting. It's a very good idea to always put them. The abs function that returns the absolute value of a number, right? The number is less than 0, negate it. Otherwise, just return the number. What happens if the number is 0? Which branch gets executed? Else, right? And it doesn't terribly matter because either way is 0. Right? Now, what can go inside an if statement? Another if statement, right? Woohoo! So the sign function, let's actually build it. What does the sign function do? It returns -1 if negative, 0 if 0, and 1 if positive. Does that make sense? So how can we do it?
N is greater than 0 and return.
Okay. Oops.
N is less than 0.
If n is greater than 0,
Yeah.
return n. Return 1, sorry.
Else,
Else, I cannot return, right? Yet. I need to see whether it's 0 or negative, right?
if N is greater than, smaller than equal to 0.
I want to distinguish whether it's smaller or equal.
Oh,
So
okay.
smaller. If it's smaller, what do I return?
Return 1.
-1, right?
Yes. Return 0.
Does this make sense? No.
No, did we close the bracket?
We only have this bracket. We could open them for all of them. I was just telling you that we should do it, right? And then I didn't do it. That's what happens when your prof doesn't follow his own advice. It's normal. Nobody does that. Now, Dilafruz, do you have a question? Can we trace it, right? What happens if I call sine of -7? What's it gonna do? Come and check this.
If
And it's greater than 0, it's gonna return 1, but it's not, right? So it's gonna go do the else clause, right? And then it's gonna check, is n less than 0? Yes, so it's gonna return -1, right? Does that make sense?
yeah.
This is called nesting of if statements. Inside an if, you have another if, right? How many levels can you nest? Any number, right? You will get tired before the compiler does, right? Eventually the compiler would break. There is a physical limit, but it's so big that it doesn't matter. But we get confused once we nest too much, right? Does that make sense? Could we rewrite this different ways? Could we do it without nesting at all?
Yes.
How?
There should be some way. That's why you're asking that question.
Smart. Here's the deal, right?
Yeah.
Once we return, we are done, right? So in a way, since we are returning, this is the same as an else, right? So I could just do this, and it would work. In fact, I could just do this, and it would also work.
of the second if?
Can you put or where?
Instead of second if?
Just or? That's not syntactically correct.
I mean, after removing that if, the second.
What do you mean? Where come type. Where do you put the or? Come type. Come. Let's do it. Come. Let's see. Yes, this is a contact or, right?
I mean, do we have to type or we have to put the sign of or?
You cannot, the word OR doesn't mean anything to Java.
Okay.
You need two vertical braces, but where would they go? Okay, it's not that brace. It is this guy. No, it is that guy, yeah. No, right? Or, what is or in Java? It's an operator that takes two Boolean values and returns another Boolean value, right? If is a statement, it just doesn't go syntactically. It's grammatically incorrect, right? You need to write the keyword if. Yeah. If you think about it, it wouldn't even make sense in English either, right?
Yeah.
Just grammatically doesn't make sense. But now we are getting many different ways of doing the same kind of stuff, right? Many times with something like this, right? This is less code, but it's kind of weird, right? There is no rhyme or reason, right? If we do it nested, oops. The thing is that those three options are kind of equal, right? Does that idea make sense? You're either greater than 0 or less than 0, right? There is no particular reason to prefer one over the other, right? So they should be kind of at the same level. The code should show you the same thing. When you nest it, it doesn't, right? So one way that we can do it is eliminate the brace and nest it as if it was nested this way. Does this make sense? So now our three return statements are the same level. This looks as if they're all equal, rather than one being more important than the other. Does that idea make sense? This is the exact same statement as far as the compiler is concerned as with the nesting. That is what is happening, except that we format it differently. Does that idea make sense? If we had many more options, we would do it the same way. Make sense?
So you don't need the curly braces?
You don't need the curly braces. They are a good idea. They are needed if you do more than one statement. Let's see, if we had just, this is horribly complicated and we shouldn't do it, but if you have something like this, where you have two statements, right, being the body of the if, being the stuff that happens within the if, right? You need the braces. if you don't put them, what it really happened is this, and so this else is hanging. Does that make sense? What really happened is only this is part of the if statement, and then this is a statement after the if. Right? So when you have more than one statement inside the body of the if, then you need the braces. If not, you don't need them. They are never, it's perfectly okay to put them. This makes sense. By the way, some people don't like this, having several returns from the same function. If you have it with convoluted logic, then it can get really confusing. When did you return and when you didn't, right? I tend to use several returns. To me, this logic actually makes sense. Some people would rather do.
Why are we writing int a and s? Why do we need to write?
We don't. But if we don't want to have return statements, we do. Ans for answer. This is another way of writing it.
So instead of writing a lot of returns,
You calculate this stuff and make sure that there's only one way out, and then you do one return.
which one is easier?
Easier for whom? For what? I do the 17 returns. I find it super easy. A lot of beginner books tell you explicitly never do that and have only one return. Most people are in the middle. I tend to do several returns with no problem whatsoever. But that's me. I find it easier to understand the 3 returns, but I don't know about you guys. What did you find easier to understand? You don't care? They're all equally hard.
Once you do, you'll come to know that which one is easy for us.
But yeah, feel free to do it any way you prefer, right? There is many different ways of achieving the same result. So we have talked about nested if statement and about chained if statements. Oh, let me just confuse you.
Already?
Yeah, there is a really weird operator that comes from C that is actually really cool. An if statement, right, is a statement, right? It doesn't yield a value. We have expressions and operators, we have plus and minus, right? Those things yield values, right? Expressions end up producing a value, right? Then we have statements. We have seen, we have actually function calls, right? We have assignment. Our void function calls don't produce a value, right? We have assignment, and then we have if statements. Those are the statements that we have seen. Actually, we have seen a bunch of other statements that don't produce values, right? Like import and declaring our functions and things like that, right? Declaring our classes and functions, those are also statements. But the ternary operator is an operator. It's something that returns a value, right? But it takes 3 parameters. The first one is a Boolean, and the other 2 are of the same type. And if the first parameter is true, it returns the second argument. If not, it returns the third argument. Does that make sense? No, perfect. I achieved it. We have operators, 3 plus 4, right? Can you guys see that stuff?
Yes.
This weird operator is question mark and colon. It takes 3 arguments, true, 4, and 5, right? If the first argument is true, or some expression that evaluates to true, right, it's going to return this guy. If not, it's going to return this guy. Does that make sense? So what would this whole expression return? 4. Does that make sense?
I didn't get it.
It's an operator, right, that takes how many arguments? 3. The first argument is a Boolean, right? So it evaluates the first argument. If it's true, then returns the second argument. If not, returns the third. So in this case, we're passing true, question mark, 4 or 5. So this would return the first argument, 4. If this was false, then it would return what? The second argument, which is 5.
How we come to say that 4 is right? Like,
What do you mean? We are not deciding what is right or wrong.
Yeah, he says how do we get 4?
4, yeah.
On the first one, you get 4 because you have true. The first argument, is it true? Then return the second. If not, return the third.
So what is the first? If it's like that, true, question mark 5.
If it was true, question mark 5, colon 4, what would this return? 5, the first argument. Second argument, sorry.
Okay.
Does that idea make sense? Now, we could change this and rewrite it. What could be our condition? We're going to return something, right? We need to return. What can be our condition? This, right? Number is less than 0. If number is less than 0, what do we return?
Okay. So
What do we
condition, okay.
minus
Minus
number? Otherwise,
number.
does this make sense?
Okay. Let us run it.
Yeah, let's do it. Yay, we got 4. What is easier to understand?
No, we write 4. Then
We-
we should return.
Past minus 4.
Yeah, we wrote minus 4. Then it should return minus of number, right?
Yes, what's minus minus 4?
So it will calculate like that.
Yes.
Like it will perform the calculation.
Yes, you are doing operators, right?
Oh.
You're applying the unary minus operator to a value.
Okay, so if you write 4,
Yes. Let me do 5 so you see that it's, yes, that's what the absolute value does.
Oh, this is for calculation of absolute value.
Yes.
ABS is absolute value. So it is not performing without absolute. So suppose it is not an absolute value, and if it is less than 0, then we want to display it as.
Well, let's try to do sine.
Yeah. Oh, in that case we'll do sine.
Let's do sine, right? N greater than 0. If n is greater than 0, what do I return? 1. If it's not, what do I return? Well, I'm going to evaluate is n less than 0. If it is, then what do I return?
Minus.
Otherwise, 0. Is this cool or what? What is easier to understand? With if statements or with the ternary operator?
It's just about getting used to, We'll get used to this. If you use this more, we'll get used to this.
Yeah, that is partially true. Yeah, but most people find if statements easier to understand. But yeah, whatever works for you. I'm more interested in you guys learning to read this thing because a lot of people write code like that because it looks cooler.
Short, probably, right?
Yes, makes it short, so it's like haha, right? I'm not getting paid by the line, so I do one line. If I'm getting paid by the line, which one do I do?
Else.
Yes, and actually put extra lines here, right?
Yeah. That's good. Nested.
But
So do we get paid by lines?
no.
No? In real world, how do you get?
They're trying to measure productivity of a programmer is hard as hell, right? It's not has nothing to do with this class, right? It's software engineering, it's what you. But trying to measure productivity of a programmer is hard, right? Because you're really not producing lines of code. You're producing features. You're producing value, actually. Right? Many times it's easy because your feature has an immediate value, and so some weeks it feels like, oh, this week I made 50K, right? Because the company used to spend 50K in this, I implemented this, now it's free, so I just made 50, right? Sometimes it feels like I just didn't do a thing for a month, right? That's one initially some people try to measure by lines of code, right? It seems like an obvious measure of output, right? You produce lines of code. It's insanely dumb because it leads to that kind of stuff, right? And actually, there's a famous guy from the first years of Apple who there was a bean counter who wanted to count lines of code, right? And so what he did is actually he simplified code. So he produced minus 20,000 lines of code or something like that, right? Just deleted stuff that wasn't used. They stopped asking him to give him lines of code. Right? It's a really bad measure but it has been used as a measure. It is really hard to actually measure value. In small projects, in small things, it's actually many times it's very direct, but if not, you tend to measure the value of a team or something like that. Right? Many times you're optimizing and it seems really weird. Let me waste another 2 minutes telling you that kind of stuff. In big companies, one programmer can make an immense amount of output, both good and bad, right? I was working at Microsoft. We were making about $1 billion a year. We were selling ads, right? And so anything that you could do, right? If I change something that makes 1% of improvement, right? I just made $10 million. So it basically had us, right, kind of playing with that kind of stuff to see what can you do. And sometimes you do the reverse. Once we screwed up an algorithm and it didn't really sell much ads for a weekend, and we wasted $1 million, which was terrifying. But it is what it is. Overall, we made money. Many times it is that kind of stuff. So, let's do actually a cool thing that has been proposed as a test for programming. And we're going to do it just so people stop asking it as a test for programming, but also so that you are trained for your coding interview. Now, Fizzbuzz. I actually knew this in my misspent youth as a drinking game. You start counting, right? And if the number is divisible by 3, instead of saying the number, you say fizz. If it is divisible by 5, you say buzz. And if it's divisible by both 3 and 5, you say Fizzbuzz. And if you get confused, you have to drink. We don't do drinks here, but we can do Fizzbuzz. Count.
2.
Fizz.
Count.
4.
4.
5.
Not 5.
6.
Buzz.
Buzz.
Oh,
Fizz. Oh, fizz.
Yeah.
Fizz.
Or no, he was 5, so you're 7.
Buzz.
No, 8.
8.
8.
Fizz.
5. Buzz.
That's
Does,
good.
does that make sense? Yes. Reasonably makes sense. So let's implement it, right? Let's implement it as a function that gets a number and returns the right thing. Either the number or fizz or buzz or Fizzbuzz. Does that make sense? How can we do it?
In percentage.
We're going to do 3. So if it's divisible by 3, what do we do?
Fizz.
Is it always fizz?
No. If it is also divisible by 5, it is Fizzbuzz.
Yes. So I would
We have
nest.
to make and. Oh, okay.
I mean, we could do it, right?
Okay. It's like
What do we return here? Is divisible by both 3 and 5.
Fizzbuzz.
Here, what do we return?
Fizz.
It was divisible by 3, but not by 5, right?
Yeah, it's fizz.
Now here, it wasn't divisible by 3. So what do I need to do?
Was.
But no.
I don't know. I need to check whether it's divisible by 5, right? Otherwise, n is a number, but if I do this, it will work. The empty string concatenated with the number. So n is a number. It's an int, not a string, right? So if I do return n, I'll probably get
Yeah, we'll just return it. It won't return an actual like.
compiler error, right? Because I'm trying to return an int instead of a string.
Yeah.
This will
Oh,
make
okay,
it into
so
a
It'll
string.
make it a string.
You want to return a string, so that's
Yes, I'm always returning a string.
Yes.
okay. That's how they will put a string.
Static. So fizz bus of 3. Four, 5, 6, and then just for kicks.
15.
Yes.
15 which is divisible by both.
Yep. So what do we expect to get when we run this?
Fish,
Fizz.
fish for
Bus.
bus, fish, fish bus.
Good. Maybe. Fizz for bus, fizz bus. Does this make sense? Although we'll probably do fizzbus 700 times more in the course, the idea was that there's many people who go to programming interviews who cannot solve this kind of problems. Not that in particular you need to know how to do fizzbus. But
Six was fizz.
6 is fizz because it's divisible by 3.
Divisible by 3.
If it's visible by 3, it's fizz or buzz?
It's fizz.
Just fizz.
3 is fizz, 5 is buzz.
What about buzz? 5.
5.
Just 5?
And both is fizzbus. So 5 is bus, 10 is bus, 15 is
15 is
fizzbus.
bus. Fizz buzz, okay.
You didn't put else before the second if. So it works. We don't need
Wait,
to.
what do you mean? Which else?
Second if.
The one that you nested. That
Yes.
one.
This?
Yeah.
Usually you have to put else if.
No. I'm nesting. So if the first condition is true, what you do is go look at another if. It's not hard for the else.
If not, go to the second if.
Yes. Many times we do else if when we are chaining, but in this case, we
So it's not
decided not to.
an else if.
It's not an else if, this is just another if.
So we can put other if belong the first if.
It's inside, it's not below.
Yeah.
It's inside, yes. Yes, you can put other if. You can put whatever other statements you want. Whatever other control statements you want. We'll see a bunch of others. Does this make sense? Can we do it can we do it with question mark operator? just to add enough confusion and delay. So we'll check n%3 if it is, right?
Yeah, condition.
Then we check again n%5 equals 0. If it is, then we return fizz bus. Otherwise, we return fizz. Then otherwise, oops, we check n%5 equals 0. If it is, wait, yeah. Then we are going to return bus. Otherwise, and we messed something up. Oh, I need to do return. And we got the same result in a much more convoluted way. Isn't this cool? Oh, yeah, let's do this. Let's do max. Actually, since we have max here, let's do min, right? Let me just do this. And you should not do nested question marks, but hey. Minimum of 2 elements. The smallest one of those two, right? What do we do with an if statement? If A less than B, what do we return? If they are tied, what are we returning?
Yeah.
Nothing.
What do you mean nothing?
Well, not even that. So,
We are returning B
oh yeah, because the else. You're right.
because it's not, right? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sure, why not? They're the same. It doesn't matter which one I return, right? They're the same. Does that make sense? Yep. Cool. Now let's do min3. How do we do that?
Yeah, if A is less than B and A is less than C, return A. If B is less than A, B is less than C, return B. Else, return C.
Is this correct?
I hope it is correct.
It's almost correct.
Almost. There is something.
Yes. Let's do min 3, 4.
Min 3. That is min 3. Oh, you're doing that.
Yeah.
Oh,
3, 1, right? Let's do min 3 of 3, 3, and 4. Let's do stuff like 1, 2, 3, 1 to 4, 3, 4, 1, right? So what should this return?
3, 1, 1.
3, 1, right?
3, 1, 1,
1, 1,
3.
3. Yes. Four. Oops. What did we do? If A is less than B and A is less than C, is that correct? Is that true? Sorry. No. A is equal to B and less than C, right? Oh, so let's go C. Is B less than A and B less than C? No. Because they're equal, right? So that is actually a logical mistake. How can we fix it with this kind of code? Yay! An even better way. Now that we made this complicated, reusing your functions can make your life so much easier. Don't do complicated stuff. Don't do complicated ifs. Do super simple functions and combine them together. It's going to make your life easier. Does that make sense? Cool.
Excuse me, why you didn't put public before static?
Okay, let me mention it. Let me mention two things. One, it is perfectly okay for now to assume that this is magic and you don't need it. But let me explain what public is, right? Public says programs that are outside of this class can access this method. And we normally, most of our functions, I tend to declare the public static. Static is necessary because main is static. Static means you don't need an instance of the class. You can just use the code without creating an object. Public is not terribly necessary because we only have one class. We only have one file.
But if you have a different class.
If you had different files, different classes, then you couldn't call it if it wasn't public.
So, how do we create classes? Like,
we will cover this, right? I'm trying to do the logic first, but by this.
So is it private now?
It is weird. It is packaged. It's actually accessible by other classes within the same package.
When we put private, it means it just.
Private means
in
just
the
me.
class.
Nobody can see my private parts. When you do public, it's everybody. There is actually protected and the default, which is package. We will talk about it later. This was just so you guys don't wonder about it forever. We will get to it in about 3 weeks or 4 weeks when we start looking at classes. Now, let me prime your brain. There is exercises and we'll do some of those. Let me mention another statement which is interesting. We have seen that we can do if statements, right? We have seen the question mark ternary operator, right? It's ternary because it's the only one that has 3 arguments instead of 1 or 2. We have the switch statement, which is for when we have a bunch of possible values and we want to do something for each one of them. And the values have to be integerish. They're integrals. They're stuff that converts to an int. Small like bytes and characters and booleans and those kinds of things, right? When you do a switch statement, you do the keyword switch, then you put an expression that in this case doesn't have to evaluate to a boolean. In fact, it normally doesn't evaluate to a boolean. And then you put cases. You do case and you put a value, a colon, and then whatever you want, right? More cases, you put break, meaning get out of the case, right? Default is if nothing happens, right? So, let's do this. Function that would return the name of the day given a number, right? And we'll say that 1 is Sunday, right? We could do this with if statements, right? But now we're going to do it with a switch. Switch day, which is my variable, which is of type int, so life is good. Case 1, what do we want to return? Break. Oops. What the F? My fingers are typing the wrong stuff. Yeah. Actually, we don't need the breaks, sorry. Because we are returning. When you return, you're done. In fact, if we try to put the break, the compiler will complain.
And what is break used for again?
For getting out of the switch.
We're going to do it in the end? Because when you return, you automatically...
When you return, you're out of the switch and the function. So you don't need a break. In fact, if you put code after the return, Java will complain. It's like, okay, this code will never get executed. You shouldn't put it here.
So does this restrict the number we put from case 1 to 5, like?
No, unless you do something with it.
Like instead of case 6, it didn't any further. But if you put case 10, like
That's
if you enter 10, it won't return anything.
What do you mean? Wait. One sec.
Let us finish this.
Case 7. Saturday. Default. Right?
Okay, that's what I will ask you. That answers.
Oh, okay, perfect. The default means if it didn't match any of the ones above, right? Does that make sense?
So this is a replacement for if else statement.
This is a replacement for having 17 if statements.
What would you need to use break?
Okay, let's say that your professor is an a-hole and says that you cannot use more than one return, right? We'll do string answer, right? Or so here you would do whatever, and at the end you would do return answer, right? So here you do answer equals Sunday, right?
we can do that?
Yeah.
Of course.
I
It's a text editor.
Yeah.
Every text editor has edit replace. And you can replace stuff. Find replace. In the Mac is Apple R. I think on Windows, if you have the Control R, is the standard for replacing, but it depends on your IDE. You can actually do even more stuff. Many times you can make it so that it replaces all the files in a folder or things like that. So what happens if I do this, right? When I try to run it, try to go to my main, let me copy this. Do the name of 2 and the name of 20. What do we expect to get? Monday and invalid day. We get invalid day and invalid day.
Invalid day.
Oops, what happened?
Okay.
Says 2, answer equals Monday, right? But then it keeps going. Oh, answer equal Tuesday. Oh, answer equal Wednesday. Until we get to here. What do we need? Breaks. Answer equals Sunday and get out of here. Answer equal Monday and get out of here.
It's like our brackets.
Yes. Does this make sense? So now if we make it actually work. Switch statements are pretty. They're a lot prettier looking than chain if statements, but they are limited. Your expression has to evaluate to something like an int. Does that make sense? Okay, now they have done strings, but you can't do it with like floating points. You can't say, oh, if it's greater than 10 or something like that, right? It has to be specific values. It has to be something like that. So it's useful, but not as useful. What do you use in real life? If statements or switch statements or question mark operators? Everything, right? The only one that you really need is the if statement. With that one, you can avoid learning the other two. It's a good idea to learn all two, right? At least to be able to read them. The assignments will make you do if statements and switch statements. And you can play with the ternary operator. We have 7 whole minutes to go or something like that, right? 4 whole minutes.
4 minutes.
Woo. Sometimes you actually want to fall through, right? So imagine that you're doing a function called days in month, that given the month, 1 January 12 being December, and assuming that it's not a leap year, returns how many days are in that month, right? So it could do 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, 10, and 12, would return 31. If it's a 2, would return 28. 4, 6, 9, and 11 will return 30, and fit outside the range, we're going to turn 0. Does that make sense? Now, there we are using the fact that you fall through instead of breaking.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Where is break?
There is no break because we're using returns. Once you return, you're out of the loop and of the function, so there is
So
no
there
break
also
for
we
break.
are using return, but we are
No,
not.
when we had returns, we didn't need breaks. When we put it as here we don't have returns anymore.
Oh, okay.
That's why you need the
Oh,
breaks.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, we changed return.
Yeah.
Initially we had return and then we changed to answer.
So now go home, play with ifs and breaks. Start with assignment 3, right?
I have a question. I want to practice on Eclipse, but I
Yeah.
cannot.
One sec. Is it something on your specific computer? Let me finish this.
Okay.